Hey everybody, this is James with Trinity River Knives. Today I'm working on the quarantine collection that I started up a couple weeks ago. I've got them ground and profiled to get the shape that I want, and today we're going to be working on bevels and heat treat. I'm going to start off by establishing my bevel with an 80 grit ceramic belt. I grind it in at a really steep angle, almost at 45 degrees. Once I have the bevel established, I'll go ahead and work it back up towards the spine. This helps keep it from getting too high too quickly. If you grind your bevel too high and then have to take it down because your edge is too thick, it's really hard to get it flat. And it's going to look kind of rounded or multifaceted. It's just not going to look clean. And then once I have the bevel where I want it on one side, I switch the knife around and do the same thing on the other side. I always make sure to mark how high I'm going on my bevels on either side, just to make sure that they stay consistent and symmetrical. And then we're just going to do the same thing with the other knives. One thing, if you're doing this, I find it easier to do it barehanded than with gloves. It's hard for me to feel where the platen is underneath my knife. And with the cleaver, we're going with a really steep angle on there before I round it out. I want it to be a really good cutter. And then what I'm doing is I'm taking this to a medium surface conditioning belt just to soften that bevel line to give it a nice clean look. Then on this knife, I wanted to have a pretty pronounced choil on the back end near the plunge line. It's not really necessary, it's more aesthetic than anything, but I like the way it looks. I start off by roughing it in with a file just to give me a point to start from, and then I'll go in with the small wheel to get it to its final dimension. After that, I'm going to go ahead and grind in the swedges up on the top. This is just using a cut-off piece of 4x4 that I have set to 45 degrees. And there's the result. Now I'm just taking the flats up to 150 grit. I usually don't go higher than 150 grit before heat treat. You can, it won't hurt anything. And here's the results from that. And they're ready for heat treat now. Now for heat treating, I'm using pretty basic methods. This is just a map torch into a kind of makeshift forge made out of fire bricks. I'm using 1084 steel. This is a great steel if you don't have sophisticated heat treating equipment. All you need to do is get it up past its critical temperature. This is the non-magnetic point. You'll see me testing it with the magnet here, and then quench it in oil. The oil that I'm using is just regular vegetable oil. I have it heated to 120 degrees. Heating it up lowers its viscosity, so it actually cools a little bit quicker. And then we're going to repeat the same things with the other knives. And afterwards I'm going to test a file. If it's hardened, it'll skate the file really easily. And then here I just wanted to check the temperature of the oil. I wanted to make sure it didn't get too hot. If it gets too hot, then it stops cooling the metal as efficiently. One thing I wanted to point out, the steel isn't nearly as bright as it looks in the video. It's kind of a dull orange color. When it's at that temperature, it looks like it's white hot, like forging temperature on here. And it's not nearly like that. So if you're going to try heat treating like this, don't go off of the color that you're seeing here. This is mostly because I'm heat treating in pretty low light. I have my garage door closed and then just the overhead light on. It makes it easier for me to monitor where the heat is. And that's the last one in the oil. You see me sawing it back and forth. This is just to help keep the bubbles from forming on the outside, having cold spots. And there we go. Heat treated and ready for temper. I'm going to be doing 2 cycles of 2 hours at 400 degrees. Alright, we've got the knives out of their first tempering cycle of 400 degrees for 2 hours. We're going to stick them back in there for a second one once they're cooled down. If you're using a toaster oven for tempering, it works fine, but make sure you have an actual oven thermometer in there because these are not accurate at all. I have this set at 350 degrees and we're holding it 400, which is the temperature I want. If I had the oven set to 400 degrees, it would be about 450, and the knives would just not end up nearly as hard as we want them. And now that they're tempered, it's just time to clean them up. And I'll start working up the grits once I have all the scale knocked off. Just working carefully on both sides. You really don't want to mess up at this point. Otherwise it takes a long time to fix because the steel's hardened. After going up to 220 grit aluminum oxide belt, I switch over to the surface conditioning belt. The surface conditioning belt leaves a really nice finish. It's a very smooth, consistent satin finish that looks really nice. I start off with a red medium surface conditioning belt, and then the blue is a fine belt, just a little bit tighter pattern on there. Once the bevels are cleaned up, I'll go ahead and clean up the flats, remove any scale, and get the finish up where I want it. On these, I'm going from 150 grit to 220 to 400. And you can certainly go up to a higher grit than that, but this was the look I wanted for these knives. Alright, so we got the blades finished up. The flats are taken up to 400 grit. The bevels themselves are finished with a surface conditioning belt. Which leaves a nice satin finish, and I like the way that ends up looking once it's done. So I'll get these cleaned up and then we'll move on to the handles. Alright everybody, thanks for watching. On the next video we're going to be working on the handles and getting the knives finished up. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.